get started, first, Doug, one thing I think is really interesting about your bio that maybe not everyone knows is that you actually were a founder at one point in your career as well. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Hi, everyone. I tell people, you may know me as the first, second gentleman, but do you really know me? And part of my backstory was I was an entrepreneur as well, and I represent a lot of entrepreneurs back in the day. So when I was a 7th or 8th year associate in big law, I decided to bet on myself, and I thought I could do it, better, faster, quicker than a big firm could. I wanted my own clients. So with 2 little kids, a mortgage, and a partner with 3 or 4 little kids and a mortgage, we decided to start our own boutique in Beverly Hills. We took real space. We wanted it to look legit. We put everything we had into it, and we just bet on ourselves. And our business plan was Field of Dreams. If we build it, they will come. And we aggressively marketed to other lawyers, and lo and behold, after 6, 7 years of many sleepless nights and wondering, how I would do this, we did it, and we scaled it up, and we got acquired by a big national firm called Venable, and that's what I did. So it was one of those incredible experiences that helped me as a lawyer. It really helped me talking to small business owners and entrepreneurs when I was second gentleman, traveling all around the country and the world. And it's an experience that so formative. I would not be sitting here today had that not happened.
Great. And Ambassador Flake, you were the ambassador to Turkey, right?
Right.
And currently you're the executive chairman of the World Trade Center Utah. Can you tell us about that and sort of the types of companies that you work with through that organization?
You bet. Yes, Cheryl and I just returned a year ago from the ambassadorship, and it was a great place to be. Turkey is right smack in the middle of everything that goes on. It's where East meets West, and so wonderful time. But coming back, we have a home in Utah and in Arizona, so we split time. The World Trade Center Utah is basically the state's trade promotion arm, right? As we speak, Governor Cox from Utah is in Australia with a trade mission. We typically go on those as well, but needed to be here. And we're basically helping companies in Utah navigate this extremely challenging environment. Utah is very outward-facing. I think more languages are spoken in Utah than any other state, mostly because of Mormon missionaries going out and returning. And a lot of companies are dealing with the tariff situation, and so we help them navigate that. Set up foreign trade zones and other mechanisms to help them mitigate the challenges, as it were. So it's been extremely effective, and we have a big and growing membership there.
Great. And Ambassador Flake, you, of course, were a Republican senator from Arizona. Doug, you were affiliated with the Democratic Party, from what I can tell, right? So you come at these issues from both sides of the partisan divide. It used to be that free trade was an area of great partisan agreement, and 30 years plus after NAFTA, we're at a place where free trade is not neither the policy of the U.S. nor an area of partisan agreement. I'm sort of curious, so when we look at tariffs and the uncertainty in tariffs, what do you see, and what are your concerns about what that will do for long-term U.S. competitiveness? Doug, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I am now a partner at Wilkie Farr & Gallagher. It's an international law firm. So I have that perspective. I have the perspective of being in the administration for 4 years, in an era of free trade and I'd say soft power around the world, including something like USAID, which that getting dismantled. A lot of people don't understand what that is. I think it's devastating for people around the world in terms of what they did in feeding people and vaccines and mosquitoes, but it's also the soft power, because when I would travel around the world, and I know, Ambassador, you know this, you would see China would build a massive airport somewhere or an infrastructure system or a dam, and they're trying to have influence around the world. And we were doing it through helping people through programs like that. And that is, again, another thing that is hurting us. It's hurting all of us here. And you talk to the soybean farmer in the Midwest who's not selling those soybeans now to some recipient of USAID. So it has this massive effect. So it's not just tariffs that's affecting us. But yeah, the tariffs, all we talk about with our clients, what you're talking about is, how do we deal with this uncertainty? It's like throwing a dart sometimes on when you're going to actually import goods to see if it's the right time, tariff-wise. There's no predictability. And what that means, I see it again in my international firm, it's people are going to drift away. They're going to start drifting to Europe, start drifting to the Middle East, start drifting Asia, Africa. And we're going to lose by that. We're also losing talent. People are going to start drifting away. All these folks who would come to our country and help innovate, help in science, help in tech, they're all going to start drifting away as well, which hurts all of us. This is not a red state, blue state issue. This is an American issue. This is about our economy. And I can go on, but the last thing is you're seeing it, this corruption, this authoritarianism slant is clearly not good for business. Because if you're paying attention, especially if you're an entrepreneur trying to compete, and you go back to the inauguration, you see the biggest tech companies up there over to my right shoulder, all paying millions of dollars to be there. That's when it started. You go right to yesterday with the destruction of the East Wing and the rebuild, guess what? You've got people coming in and donating or giving tens of millions of dollars. And what does that get them? You're not going to be able to do that. You're looking at pardons. It's literally pay-for-play pardons. You're looking at who's getting a merger approved, what antitrust enforcement is happening or not happening. It cannot be a pay-to-play economy. Authoritarianism and all this stuff, corruption, not good. Not good for entrepreneurs who are out there just trying to compete the right way, the fair way.
Great, great. So, Ambassador Flake, you mentioned going on trade missions now, and obviously when you were an ambassador, you were a part of trade missions. And I'm sort of curious, what are those meetings like now, and how have they maybe shifted? Like, what are those conversations like with trading partners and allies as we think about where the U.S. is headed?
Yeah. Well, that's what troubles me. I'm a traditional Republican, one who believes in limited government, economic freedom, free trade, as free as you can get it, and a tax and regulatory environment that is predictable. Mm-hmm. So companies know what they're getting into, and they can plan for it. We have none of that right now, and so it's extremely concerning. And one thing that our partners have always, and our allies have always known, is that we would be predictable, that we would be reliable. And that's my biggest concern. Just take Turkey, where I was. These long-term tariffs, not long-term, but for several years, not just one administration, but Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, imposed in the first Trump term and kept in the Biden administration, and are still there today. The effect of that is that, well, Turkey will say, we're going to retaliate. And so they do on farm products. So just that one tariff on Section 232, or the steel and aluminum tariffs, costs American farmers up to $500 million a year, still. And so, as Doug said, people will always retaliate. That's what they have to do. And so we have this situation where, it's the unpredictability that is really hampering businesses. And that's what I'm sure all of you are struggling with, is to be, you can't just be the low-cost producer or find a low-cost manufacturer. You have to have resilience. You have to have supply chains that you fit into or take advantage of that you can rely on and count on, and that's very difficult in this environment.
And some of this is about, U.S. leadership in the world, right? I mean, the U.S. was sort of the dollar is the standard, right? The U.S. sort of led alliances and played a huge role in things like the World Bank and the IMF. Do you, beyond the sort of tit-for-tat tariffs that you described, there is sort of a pulling back of the U.S. from that world leadership position, and what are the implications of that? Ambassador Flake?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Just for example, I was in Geneva a couple of months ago. This is after my ambassadorship, but I still have friends in the diplomatic community and in Europe there. And I was sitting down right near the UN headquarters in Geneva, where a lot of these multilateral decisions are made on whether it's cybersecurity issues, aviation measures that affect all of us. And one of the ambassadors said, we used to check where the United States was before we took a position. And we would basically mimic it or want to be right there where the US was. He said, now we don't care. We just move on. And that's my fear, is that these decisions are still being made that affect us, whether it's currency issues, like I said, cybersecurity issues or aviation measures. They'll still be made, and when we pull back, the US, then other actors step forward, principally China. And it may not be the values that we hold dear in terms of rule of law and everything else, and so that's my big concern. And so I hope that we can get through this, and I think there is some realization that the US, has to step forward, that we have to assume the leadership position. That has been good. This rules-based international order that we established, mostly after World War II, has benefited other countries. Like President Trump always says, other countries have benefited, but the truth is, we have benefited significantly. We've been a huge beneficiary of that, and we need to find a way to make sure that we're on a level playing field, but we need to recognize that we have benefited a lot from this system that we've created.
And Doug, as second gentleman, you obviously traveled globally all the time. And I'm curious, this is not a phenomenon that started, this year. This has been happening for a little while. How did you make the case for continued U.S. leadership at a time even when there's obviously, sort of different feelings about free trade and other issues like that in the U.S.?
Well, I think I traveled to 23 different countries as second gentleman, and it was one of the best parts of the job because, again, I would always bring my business sense to it, the relationship building sense, which you have to do in the business world. So every time I was meeting with a world leader, whether it was representing the nation at an inauguration, as oftentimes if I did that, I was the first person that a foreign leader would meet when I did that. So whether it was Korea, Philippines, and that really set the tone on the relationship. So I always came with not this bullying or you do this or else or you owe us this because, which that's just not going to work for the long term. It's relationship building over the long term. And so just like in the business world, these are people. And these relationships are important, and nobody wants to be, extorted or bullied to, pay, as Ambassador said, their so-called fair share. That's just not how this works. And so I would have these meetings, and major world leaders would just say, President Biden says America's back, and they would say, how long? Is this going to keep whipsawing back and forth? You need a predictable foreign policy that is based on partnership and working together and being part of this great global economy. And I would always talk about bringing in how anything that limits that, anything that's not outside, that is outside the rules-based order, the rule of law, predictable capital markets, protection of IP, is not good for all of us. Again, they kept saying around the country, especially during our campaign, these are not red and blue state issues. These are issues that are going to affect all of us. And now, it pains, myself and my wife when, we hear, oh, Kamala was right about this, right about that. We don't want to be right just for the sake of saying, I told you so. It's because Americans are hurting. Farmers are hurting. People are hurting. And a lot of people say, well, we didn't think this was going to happen. Well, we did, and it's happening, and it's even worse than we thought. So business community has to step up and come together because you have power. You have power to change this.
You mentioned IP, and right, one area that's been very difficult for a while is the relationship with the U.S. and our technology companies and how they protect their IP and what happens in China and elsewhere, stealing sort of technology secrets. And I'm curious, where do you see that going? And is the U.S. in a good position or a weaker position? Like, how can technology companies in America sort of protect their technology and their IP?
Well,
I was going to hire good lawyers.
yeah, Doug's better to answer this, but let me just say that is a real issue. It has been a real issue with China, remains an issue, will be in the future. If there is a proper use of tariffs, that's it. To basically say you play by the rules, whether it's IP or local ownership or whatever else. But if you're going to do that, you better have your allies with you. If you're going to take on China, you want the rest of the world with you. And we have to recognize that we're the biggest dog in the fight, but we're still only 20% of the world's GDP. And with that, we know that if we don't have our allies with us, then China can go around us. And if we're not a reliable trade partner, they'll find, or other countries will find that China, that they'll go to them. And that's my concern. We desperately need to take on China on these IP issues and some of the other issues, but let's have our allies with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with the erosion of the rule of law and the predictability of our courts and systems, with all this pressure being put on it by the administration and look what's happening with the DOJ, that's going to make our efforts to protect IP less predictable. And if there's a lack of enforcement here on people who are infringing on IP, that will make it less predictable here, which means people are again going to leave us. Because one of the great things about our system prior was our strong courts and enforcement, both to protect your IP and to prevent people from stealing your IP. And the more that erodes here, the less protected you're going to be. And in terms of long-term regulation and health of the industry, I'll just use Section 230 as an example of something that was designed in the early days of the internet to protect online providers from liability for things like chat rooms. But Section 230 never got amended. So that's why you see some of the stuff that's spewed out on social media that's completely unregulated, like if you're broadcasting something on a network. And that, again, is not healthy, it's not helpful, and it's just going to drive folks out of this market.
Yeah. You mentioned hire a good lawyer as a joke, but in fact, you were saying that Wilkie's having, your Brussels office is really busy. Like, this is in a way, the law firm is doing well because there's so much uncertainty. And I think that's like a telling kind of a detail, right?
Yeah, I was just at the firm has offices all over the world. We had a European retreat, and this is all we talk about, is what's going on in your country, and they all come to me because I was there. And the firm, we're having a great year. Uncertainty leads to you need to talk to your lawyers more. So all the issues you're dealing with, we have to help you get through those. But we're seeing a lot of the, capital, a lot of the finance deals, our London office, Brussels, Paris, they're all jamming because a lot of the deals and deal flow is starting to move away. Because of this unpredictability.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of those clients are large multinationals too, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a way that big companies have an advantage on entrepreneurial businesses like these folks who maybe don't have the resources for such a powerful firm.
Well, talk to me. You might know.
Well, and also, I mean, just on the subject of the firm, Wilkie's one of the firms that made an agreement with the Trump administration. You've spoken about that. Would you share your sort of thoughts, and where is that today?
Yeah, so Trump early on went after a big law. I started with a firm called Paul Weiss, and Paul Weiss made a deal with the administration And Paul Weiss is such a prominent firm that it put a lot of pressure on all the other firms. I'd been at the firm 2 months. The firm decided to make a deal with the administration. And the deal was essentially to just follow the law on hiring. We did not have to take away our diversity and inclusion page, and it required us to do certain pro bono on things we were already doing, like fighting anti-Semitism, supporting veterans and Gold Star families. So it was kind of a nothing burger in terms of the substance, but yeah, nobody wants to be told what to do. I was very public against it. I gave a few speeches and went on the record, and for the record, I still wish they hadn't done it, and I've made that very clear. That said, I'm very proud of the firm because it got targeted, because they're the firm that went after Giuliani. They're the firm that supported the J6 prosecutions. They hired me. So those values are still there. That's the same people. And we are not going to do anything that's outside of the exact terms of that so-called settlement. But yeah, look, I've had many conversations with clients, and I can say I'm there because I still believe in the firm and its values. I don't believe in running away when things get tough, and I'm really glad I stayed because it's brought me closer to the firm and the people and the organization. And lastly, if I'm going to be an advocate for pushing back and holding the legal profession's feet to the fire, it's better to do it within one of these organizations and kind of, screaming into the wind outside of it.
Yeah. Ambassador, if the second gentleman referenced the inauguration and all of the big tech CEOs who were there, as someone who spent a lot of time in Washington, did that moment surprise you? Did it seem as unique as the way it was portrayed?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised. Yeah, I was on the Judiciary Committee. We dealt with intellectual property during the entire time in the Senate and the House, and yeah, it was a much. These same individuals would come before us and testify. They're acting a bit differently now, I should say. But let me just say, though, I don't want to preach all doom and gloom here. This is still the best place in the world to do business, and you're fortunate to be here. Every administration that comes into power, Democrat or Republican, overestimates the mandate they've been given, and pendulums swing. And you'll see in the coming months that pendulum swinging back, whether it's reflected in the midterms or in other things. There is still a bipartisan consensus. I can tell you from my former colleagues who I still visit frequently, there's still a bipartisan consensus more in favor of free trade, of a rules-based international order that we lead. It's difficult because the political incentives aren't there to speak out at this point. So I think that you will see a difference. And for you as entrepreneurs and as small companies and founder-led companies, I think the responsibility is to make sure that you plan for the long term, that you don't put all your eggs in one basket in terms of, here's what the regulatory environment, the tax environment, the tariff environment is today. All of you know that changes pretty quickly. But be sure that you plan for resilience moving ahead, but just beware that political pendulums do swing. And in this case, I think with regard to trade and tariffs and regulatory policy, we'll get back more to, I think, the bipartisan consensus.
I was speaking to an economist from Wharton who himself is an immigrant, and he said that as he looks at the sort of macroeconomic environment, he is less concerned about tariffs because of what you just said, that the tariffs come and go. A period of high tariffs will be followed at some point by lower tariffs. But he actually said he's very worried about immigration policy because immigrants have been such a driver of entrepreneurship in America, of family formation, of the labor force. Sort of the number one company on this year's list was founded by an immigrant, as are many of the top AI companies and tech companies. And I'm curious, how do you guys think about immigration policy? And that seems like a really intractable issue.
Well, on the top line, the brain drain we talked about earlier, on the high-level entrepreneurs and, again, in tech and science and all these things, where people have come to this country because of how great it is and because of the opportunity and living the American dream, and have come and built amazing businesses using the tools that we have here. And that is a good thing. It's a good thing, and we need to be able to continue that. But to then go to, just demonizing every immigrant, and, in my hometown of Los Angeles, to see, what was going on with, kind of unfettered raids on people who are actually here legally, being disappeared, and it's just outrageous. But we need secure borders, we need a rational immigration policy. There's no doubt that's what Republicans and Democrats have said. I know when you were in the Senate, when Kamala Harris was in the Senate, you would have conversations of Congress needs to get together and pass fulsome legislation to deal with the border. You can't leave it to each administration to go in and try to figure out, so talk about the pendulum switching back and forth. That's not a rational policy at all. So that needs to be fixed, and your friends in Congress need to be the ones to step up and stop politicizing it.
I was part of the so-called Gang of Eight in 2013.
Marco Rubio was in that too.
One of the last examples of
What's he up to these days, right?
Slumping in his chair.
Yeah. So you were part of the Gang of Eight.
part of the Gang of Eight. But what we did is put together a massive package that dealt with border security. I think appropriated $40 billion for increased barriers and personnel and technology. But it also took into account, moving forward, here's what we're going to need in terms of immigration. That was a problem with the so-called Reagan amnesty. We never figured we're going to need more people after we regularize those who are already here, and both on the lower skill side and the high skill side. I've always been an advocate of bringing more people here. I introduced when I was back in the House, and we incorporated it in the Senate bill, the so-called Staple Act, where you basically staple a green card to the diploma of anybody who in the STEM fields has received a graduate degree in US universities. We desperately need more people here who can help grow our domestic industries. And they have in the past. We're going to really need them in the future. And so that is a big concern, where we go with immigration. Not just with the raids of meat packing plants and whatever else. Yeah, we desperately need to go have a secure border and go after those who are doing violence here. But there are a lot of people who have come here, who have played by the rules since they got here, and we need to have a mechanism to deal with them. And then moving forward, recognize we need additional labor in the future.
Great. Well, last question. You mentioned that businesses have power, right? The private sector has power in this country to affect policy and affect change. So what is something that folks in this room, or what a couple of things folks in this room can do to influence policy in the direction that they think is right?
So take just issues that have impact across all Americans, that, like a farmer not being able to sell the soybeans, and you're not being able to hire the employees that you need, and just localize it. I was doing a talk a couple of days ago, and one of the takeaways was get to know your local, state, and federal leaders, and you can actually affect some change. I remember when I was second gentleman, I would meet with business people all the time with their issues, and that's the way. So get involved. Don't just assume it's somebody else's job to take on your unique issues. You have the power to do that. And then on the bigger companies, you saw it writ large on, say, the Jimmy Kimmel issue with Disney and the affiliates. Well, that was a 4 or 5 day issue where the consumers spoke. Consumers wanted to still see Jimmy on the air, and that led to going from off the air, and then maybe those affiliates not putting him on, to he's back. So there is power out there, not only from you as business, but you as consumers, and you getting together with groups in your own field to put pressure on, and on unique issues that, as Jeff was saying, sometimes make no sense and have an easy fix. And you can just start with the things right in front of you rather than solving the worldwide issues. That's going to take some time.
Doug's exactly right. As a former legislator in the Senate and the House, I loved it when a local business would come to me and say, here is our experience. Here's why this policy or this regulation or whatever needs to change. This would affect us, or this is how it's affecting us. And I can tell you some of the pullback from maybe the worst excesses of tariffs or whatever have been because that has happened over the past several months. And whether it's through associations like this or individually on your own, make sure you get to know your local elected officials in the House and the Senate in particular at the federal level and tell them those stories. And if you can do that in a way that they can retell those stories during hearings or markups or on the Senate or House floor, that helps, because if they're armed with the best information, then they can change policy.
That's very practical advice. Ambassador Flake, Doug Emhoff, thank you so much for being with us here today.